Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 8th chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. The 7th chapter marks a distinct literary transition. Prior to the point, the first 6 chapters of the 12th chapter book of Ecclesiastes, the first half, is Solomon's observations. 7 through 12 are move into conclusions, and the 7th chapter has the densest proliferation of the words wise and wisdom in the wisdom literature book of Ecclesiastes. The first 14 verses are written in poetry, more specifically Proverbs. A proverb is a concise saying of condensed wisdom, and then 15 through 29 reverts back to prose. But the main theme in the second half of the 7th chapter, the one we're going to review, is the limitations of wisdom. Remember, this is about wisdom. In verse 15, he says, "I have seen it all in the days of my futility. There is a righteous one perishing in his righteousness, and there is a wicked one living long in his evil." Solomon writes from the vantage point of experience. He is nearing the end of his life, and he defines life as futility and moves to no obvious or even apparent purpose. He is a man on a quest, and what upsets him and offends him is the obnoxious sight of the unjust flourishing at the expense of the unjust, and righteousness not protecting one from the day of their death, but at least the righteous one is dying in their righteousness. So they die with the character that you mold on earth. How we live this life is how we will spend eternity. So we want to die in our righteousness. Wicked one living long in his evil. No matter how long you live, you cannot prevent the day of your death. So if you live in sin, you will die in sin, and the theme of judgment provides the motivation and incentive for an obedient life. 16 through 18, he cautions against extremes. Don't be over-righteous, which is to say don't be self-righteous. Do not be over-wise, which is to say not be wise in your own eyes. These are self-destructive. But then he cautions against the opposite extreme. Do not be increasingly wicked or a fool, because this it just invites premature death and destruction. But he rather cautions balance, the moderation, the golden mean of work and rest. And verse 19, he says, "Wisdom makes the wise strong, for more than 10 rulers are in the city." Wisdom is a weapon that is mightier than any muscle, mightier than any weapon, mightier than any item in the arsenal. With wisdom, we can win wars, and no amount of manpower or even fire artillery can compensate or equal or surpass wisdom as a weapon of war. Verse 20 is an expression of the doctrine of universal depravity. There is none of us who are sinless. There are good human beings, but good is a highly relative term. None of us are good in the absolute sin. There is not a righteous man on the earth who does not good and does not sin. And in the 29th and final verse, we read that we were created. This sin nature of ours is not according to our creative intention. Verse 23, "And all this I have proved by wisdom. I said, I am wise, but it is far from me." Perhaps this is an oversimplification to suggest, but perhaps the most accurate barometer of knowing, of being wise is having the acknowledgement and awareness of one's lack of wisdom. With knowledge increases simultaneously a sense of one's own ignorance. So the more you know, the more you will know that there is so much you don't know. So this is a mark in the wisdom to have the humility to ultimately acknowledge that we do not have all the answers. Nevertheless, we pursue them because they are worthy of all pursuit. That which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it? The secrets and the mysteries of the cosmos are open to God, but hidden from man. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it is the glory of a king to search it out. Proverbs 25:2. Nevertheless, there are some things that are beyond our capacities to know, that were never meant for us to know, perhaps for our own protection, and wisdom consists in realizing and acknowledging the finite capacities of the limited capacities of our finite faculties. "I have turned around, even in my heart, to know and search, and to seek out wisdom and a conclusion, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness." Solomon was a diligent scholar, scientist, and student. He had integrity and investigative integrity in his experimental ethos. He really gave it all. He spared no expense. He considered every alternate. He experimented in wisdom's antitheses when wisdom failed to produce the answer he was seeking, he sought it in alternative sources. So he does have an understanding of folly and foolish and madness by indulging therein, because in the second chapter we read that he kept his wisdom while he was the endless circle that wisdom had brought him into no answer ultimately compels him to seek from alternative sources the quest or meaning or answer to life, and he doesn't find it in wickedness or folly. So it is, wisdom is limited, but it is wisdom and righteous. The life of wisdom and the life of righteous is limited, but it is still far, far better, especially in the long run, than a life devoted to wickedness, folly, foolishness, and madness. But he describes, the ability to resist the snares and lures of a seductress as a mark of wisdom. The sinner is captured by her, and he does, he says this in the 29th verse: "Truly this only I have found, that God made man straight, but they have sought out many devices." In verse 13 he says, "For who is able to make straight what he has made crooked?" So as the creative architect of the universe, the sovereign fingerprints are all over but he made certain things crooked, but he did make man upright and straight and sinless and innocent. But because of the fallen nature, we are mired in corruption, and the entire world in which we live groans and awaits redemption, as do we. But God is not to blame for the sources. Now, the fact of injustice on the earth does not suggest that God is indifferent or unjust. It is only to say that he is not obligated to intervene in the overlap and interchange of moral agency, which is his gift to us. So part of wisdom will consist in exercising to the maximum potentiality our God-given agency. Verse 1, 8th chapter lesson itself. "Who is like a wise one, and who knows the meaning of a matter? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed." Who is like a wise man? The obvious answer is that none are quite like the wise. We are special and unique. We can do things that no one else can. So to be like a wise one without wisdom is simply impossible. And we have the ability to interpret and analyze. That's how some translations read. So wisdom is the top of the Trinitarian hierarchy of levels of intelligence, at the bottom of which is knowledge. Knowledge is the ability to know the facts. Above that is understanding, and in between wisdom is understanding. This is to know why things are, to know the underlying connections between truths. But wisdom is the ability to have the panoramic big picture. So if knowledge is the ability to dissect the puzzle, wisdom is the ability to put it all together. And two of the blessings and benefits and consequences of having wisdom is the ability to analyze. If observation is knowledge, reflection is understanding, then analyzation is wisdom. And interpret now, to draw on the puzzle analogy, the interpretations of Joseph and Daniel, two men who were put in foreign palaces and prisons to demonstrate the superiority of Hebrew wisdom over pagan Gentile. When we analyze their interpretations of their dreams, we learn that there were symbolisms in the dream, and they had it all together, and ultimately that the answer does come from God. But we still are able to interpret. Exegeting, illuminatory insights are available to the wise, so we do know the meaning of the matter. We can read this book out loud and actually know what it's talking about and add our own useful input and contribution. But for all the woes and laments that he pays to wisdom, the increase in knowledge is accompanied by greater grief in 1:18. So, and the wise gravitate towards the house of the mourning, and we are more likely to be seen weeping than laughing. But it does make us happy. Hardness of his face change. Now, what can harden a man's face is anxiety, frustration, fear, faithlessness, despair. But wisdom can make it shine. Wisdom can give it hope and make not only their lives brighter, but those around you. So wisdom is a rare and precious quality. We don't want to underestimate its value just by losing sight of the limitations of what it cannot do, because for all that it cannot do, it can do a lot of great things. Keep the king's command because of the oath before God. Solomon in the Bible, there is very little legitimate pretext for civil disobedience, which is the act of defying at least in the Bible. Now, we have to live with consequences. We live in the regulatory state. There are burdensome, cumbersome rules. We have to live with them nonetheless. We cannot advocate violent revolution just because our prison system is overcrowded, because our entire justice system is unjust. It is a paradox, and it is an irony, and it is a misnomer. But in the time in which he lived, the king would have occupied a position similar, but certainly less than God, in that everything that he did, his wish was his command, and he was sovereign in the sense over a comparatively limited geographical terrain, whereas the sovereignty of the Creator is across time and space, and it is the universe and heaven and earth. Do not be in a hurry to go from his presence. Do not take a stand in an evil matter, for he does whatever he pleases. He exercises caution earlier in the 5th chapter when advocating the appropriate levels of circumspect that we have to approach. Now, if we presented a petition to the head of state, we would take time and we would labor attentively and diligently, but so many people enter into the presence of the Almighty as a casual encounter, and they do not have the correct attitude. So he's advising similar guidelines of, stay in his presence, because his presence is like the sun in the kingdom in which he rules. And, to partake in no evil, because the fear of the sword exists for those who do evil. The sword exists to punish evil, but very often it condones and practices evil. But Solomon was at liberty to do whatever. His wish was his command. He exercised absolute power, and absolute power is only dangerous in the hand of a sinner. So there is tremendous potentiality for wise and benevolent rule and absolute monarchy. The problem is that not every human being is a Solomon. Where the word of the king is, there is power, and who says to him, "What are you doing?" It was not permitted to question or criticize rulers. In the ancient world, Solomon was very much a creature of his time, and in our modern society, where we, just look at the abuse that is daily directed as a matter of course towards President Trump. The things they say are outrageous, and they would have paid their price with their head did we live in a different form of government. But to criticize or to question a king would have been detrimental to the advancement of the function of ancient society. In fact, many Enlightenment era autocracies questioned whether a society such as ours could work if citizens were permitted to question or criticize their leaders. He who keeps the command knows no evil matter, and the heart of the wise discerns both time and right ruling. To obey commandments. Now, the conclusion of Ecclesiastes is arrived at in the 12th chapter by the author-editor, distinct from Solomon, is that the meaning of life is not found in trying to accumulate as much wisdom as we can, but in obeying what we do know. God tells us all that we do need to know. Now, he does not discourage us from exercising our independent intellectual initiative, but he does tell us the basics, the bread and butter of what we do need to do. Thou shalt not. This is more meaningful to obey what we do know than to aspire to know more than we were meant to know. But there is wisdom in obeying the laws. We do know evil. We do know what it does, why it's wrong. It is not the blind obedience. We do not simply disobey. We do not simply obey commandments and not do things we want because someone tells us to do, but because we know of the evil nature and consequences and character of succumbing. And that quality ties into discernment, which is one of the ingredients in the elixir formula of wisdom. Also included is knowledge and understanding. One can be knowledgeable and understanding and not be wise. One cannot be wise and not be knowledgeable and understanding. But also in the ingredients are prudence, discretion, and discernment. We read of these in the book of Proverbs. Also, discernment is the healthy discrimination, the correct judgment. Now, I feel that we in our postmodern society have an almost unfortunate approach to discrimination. We think of it as entirely viceful, but it is. We have to discriminate against evil. Now, discrimination itself can be evil, but we also have to discriminate against evil in order to prevent. And wisdom consists in making the most of the time, knowing the reason for the season, and seizing the opportunity that comes its way to make the most of the time, to recognize the God-given gifts of opportunities as they are presented in our midst. And also justice, we will understand. With wisdom, we will understand justice and be livid at the fact that injustice is flourishing to the extent that it does. Because for every matter there is a time in judgment, though the trouble of man is heavy upon him. This necessitates patience and endurance, because the weight of all the ails and all the sickness and all the injustice, it has an it renders us infirm by the sheer weight of its load. But the ultimate and final judgment, there is a time and place for everything, including justice. So if justice escapes us on earth because of flawed, unreliable, corrupt human men, there is always the justice in heaven, which awaits us all inescapably. For he does not know what shall be. Who shall declare to him when it shall be? In the absence of prophecy, we have absolutely zero understanding about what awaits us in the future. And so we have to live our finite faculties. We exist in time and space. We are subject to the laws of physics, and as such, we can not know more than the present. We cannot foresee in the future. We do not know what awaits us ahead. Boast not in your heart, for you know not what a day may bring forth, Proverbs 27:1. So recognizing, living with an awareness of our inability to know the future from the present is a mark and measure of wisdom. And outside, now we do have the prophecy. You should be in this book. This gives us everything we need to know about the future and the unfolding end times, which are accelerating in their unfolding to those who are wise and discerning students of the Bible, who pay attention to what's going on in the world. No one has the power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, and no one has the power over the day of death. There is no discharge in battle, and wickedness does not release those who are given to it. So the impotence, every individual is impotent over the Spirit. The Spirit is one of the three elements. Human nature exists in Trinity. We have spirit, souls, and bodies. Bodies enable awareness of external stimuli. Plants have bodies. Souls enable self-awareness. Animals have awareness. And spirits enable our awareness of God. And so human beings alone have spirits, but we are not the master of our spirits. We have no power over them. And we cannot, hellbound spirit, it cannot be translated to heaven through the agency of the one to whom it belongs. The master of our spirit is the same one in whose hands the day of our death lies, that is God, and we cannot prevent the day of our death, and we do not know when it is going to happen. We know that it has to happen, and we know that it must happen, but we do not know when it will happen. We don't know how it will happen, but this incentivizes our faithful response to trust in God. Once you're in war, there's no going out. If you're in the middle of the battlefield, you can't throw in the white flag when you're charging against a fellow army. There is no discharge in battle, at least once you are in it. And wickedness does not pay a price. Wickedness, you can weasel your way out of prison on earth through wickedness, through bribes, but the ironclad just system of the almighty judgment is impervious and immune to such wickedness. Wickedness will not release those who are given to it. It will sign their death warrant. If they try to weasel their way out through their own wickedness, they're just adding fuel to the fire, which they are already bound to burn in. All this I have seen, and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time in which a man rules over a man for his evil. All this I have seen. He is 50 years old. He is approaching the age where Aristotle considered the man to be wisest. He said man was wisest when he was 60. Solomon lived to be 1 year short of that year. But what he has observed, remember the first 6 chapters are sort of the observations, and then he begins to tie it all together in the second half of the book of Ecclesiastes. In his conclusion, of the matter is that there is a time for everything, including when evil will be, the righteous will rule, and that certainly was the case in Solomon's reign. And look up Proverbs 14:34 for the benefits of godly rule and the consequent antithesis. And so I saw the wicked buried, and they came, and they went from the place of the sacred, and they were forgotten in the city where they had done so. That too is futile. So the wicked is given the dignity and honor of a proper, respectful burial that by right belongs to the saint, but the saint is discarded and forgotten, and the wicked is. So this is a reversal of this is an inversion of the principle as Solomon sees it, that the wicked will die in rest, and but the saint should not be given such an honor befitting them. Both of these are wrong. Both of these are opposite extremes and equally evil. But this all boils down to the futility of life and human purpose on this earth. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is filled in them to do evil. Because sin and crime is not always immediately punished, this gives the sinner and the criminal license and pretext to persist. It gives them, so the punishment is the incentive. So because, the wicked are able to flourish on this world and get away with it, they can make it a whole lifetime without thinking about the consequences of their actions for other people and finally for themselves. But this is the very reason that we have to put the fear of law in the criminal and the fear of God in the sinner. Because if we let evil run rampant without punishment, without fear of punishment, then evil proliferates and corruption is accumulative. We'll notice that evil people get worse and worse and worse, seemingly with each passing day, and it marches inexorably forward. And one of the reasons for that is the permissive society in which we live. Although a sinner is doing evil 100 times and is prolonged, yet I know that there is good for those who fear God, who fear before him. So there is pleasure in sin for a season. You can get away with it for a little bit. Hebrews 11th chapter. There is, a momentary delight, but the effect is ephemeral, and sin is ultimately a sedative. So by the 100th time, the sin loses its what heroin addicts call the chasing the dragon. So it deadens itself. So after 100 times, the sin, the pleasure derived therefrom, is just not the same. But they're able to do it without punishment, and they are prolonging their life, prolonging their practice. But it is far better to fear God. The fear of God will not if one properly fears God, they will not do evil, they will not sin, even if they think they're getting away with it. The definition of integrity is what one does when no one is watching. So the God-fearing man knows that nothing escapes his notice, nothing escapes his sight, and the fear of God is the axiomatic assumption of wisdom literature in the wisdom psalm 111 verse 10, Proverbs 1:7, 9, 10, and 15:33, and Job 28:28. Ecclesiastes stops short of saying that, but we do want to pay attention to when they say fear God. Also in the conclusion 12:13, the sum of the matter, hear this: fear God and obey his commandments. But it shall not be well with the wicked, nor would he prolong his days as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. The wicked, they can flourish on the earth, but it will not be well in the world which comes after this one for them, and they have no one to blame for themselves. So by prolonging their days and getting away with sin and crime to the extent that there is not an intervention that may stimulate them to be repentant, that is actually a far more severe judgment on them. Because ultimately, no matter how long a sinner lives and flourishes, it is a very finite amount of time, and measurement of material prosperity. But, the fear of God can prevent. It will go well by the opposite inference of this verse for those who fear God. But the wicked, those who do not fear God, it will not go well for them. They will not prolong their days. They will not extend their life beyond the grave and the life after the next, because they lack the controlling element, the secret, the key, which unlocks the gate to heaven, which is the fear of God, and also unlocks the gates of wisdom. There is a futility which has been done on the earth, that there are righteous ones who get according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked ones who get according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this too is futile. The inconsistency of injustice is such that wickedness and wrongdoing should be punished, and righteousness and good should be rewarded. That is not always the case on the earth. We live in a world with sinful, corrupt, fallen natures, and just the power. With the power comes the temptation, the human temptation to exploit and oppress. And so there is an inversion of the divine justice on the earth. The wicked flourish, and the innocent are vanquished through no fault of their own. And this upsets a man, even an absolute monarch who was benevolent and wise. With Solomon, there was little he could do about it to prevent this from unfolding at every level in his king. But he writes as an observer rather than a victim of injustice. Nevertheless, his compassion and sympathy for them is poignant, and his heart is in the right place. Therefore I praised enjoyment, because there is no good to man except to eat and to drink and to rejoice, and it remains with him in his labor the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. For the fourth time he praises enjoyment. Now, part of life, the meaning of life consists in taking momentary satisfaction to enjoy the Creator's gifts, but without losing sight of the Creator. To be grateful for the gifts more so than the giver is tantamount to idolatry. So this is not the hedonistic philosophy of the eat, drink, and be merry crowd. This is now enjoyment. Apart from God is entertainment. Enjoyment with God is enrichment. So the God is in the picture. The life which he gives us, life itself is God's gift to us. How we live that life can and should be our gift to him. And one of the ways we can just acknowledge him before every meal we eat, for every drink we take, whether we're eating alone or with a family, just to always be grateful and pay tribute and reminder and due deference. When I gave my heart to know wisdom and to see the task which has been done on earth, even though one sees no sleep, day or night, Solomon is exhausted to the point of insomnia by the quest that he is on. He gives himself full, unabandoned reserve, full-hearted, all his mind, all his heart, all his energy, all his faculties, and all his capacities are engaged in this pursuit, the quest to find the meaning of life. And he wants to know wisdom, and he wants to know why we are here, the task which has been done on the earth. What is our purpose? What is our reason? Why are we here? And this causes him sleeplessness and insomnia. 17th and final verse. Then I saw all the work of God, that man is unable to find out the work that has been done under the sun. For though a man labors to seek, yet he does not find it. And even though a wise one claims to know, he is unable to find it. There is so much in the created cosmos that are beyond our ability to comprehend, far less control. This is the work of an omniscient architect. Omniscience is the attribute of infinite and unlimited intelligence, whereas our intelligence is limited and finite. Hence we cannot know. We were not endowed with the capacities to know. We were not meant to know everything that there is to know, or everything that we would like to know. And, this is not to discourage us from working or seeking. It is only to say that do not expect to get your hopes up, because he's given the whole, the all-out onslaught on this task, and he's returning virtually empty-handed, yet enriched with some closure and some clarity. And that is that true wisdom consists and knowing that it is just a humble and honest and accurate awareness of our own ignorance. And to be wise in one's own eyes, the extreme that scriptures caution us against is to think we know all the answer. A wise person will know that they do not know. One who is wise in their eyes will say they have all the answers, but we want to know the difference and understand the difference and live the difference. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye bye.